Hello, Kelly Animal Birchfield here, Philosopher-in-Chief of the Lawn Chair Philosophy Foundation, and today I'd like to share with you a few tips on how to write a philosophy paper. Now to begin, we won't begin with writing. We need to talk about how to properly read philosophy, specifically historical texts and these great figures in the canon, if we are going to examine the text in a way that is conducive to writing a good paper and just critically examining it for the sake of knowing it that way to begin with. Anyway, so let's start here. I like to begin, as any good drummer would, with the rudiments, the philosophical rudiments. Now these rudiments are patterns that reoccur in different aspects of a philosopher's system and throughout various systems throughout the history of the Western canon. Much like a rudiment in music, in drumming, here's a flam for example, stays the same in all instances. We can write it in this manner. That's a little flam for you, a little pretty flam. But this flam could be played at different dynamics, different speeds, in context with other rudiments, or in the context of a mood, within a whole musical phrase with other voices, within a particular moment in time that happens to be poignant, what have you. The flam stays the same, but given how it's used within a musical piece, that flam will express a different meaning, a different sense. So we would like to get a sense for how philosophers use their rudiments, such as the good. You'll see this pop up throughout metaphysics, the study of what is ultimately and possibly what isn't. You'll see this rudiment in epistemology, which is the science of what we know and how we know it. You'll see it in ethics. You'll see it in phenomenology, in aesthetics as well. This rudiment is used in so many various ways that to look at it in general is to look at that symbol on the board and go, ah yes, I know what it means. Precisely, I know what that means. No, these rudiments on their own contain multitudes of possibility, as well as how they have been actualized in actual philosophical work. So we'll see something like the good, maybe justice, existence, harmony, ratio, beauty. The list goes on. I have a chapter on reading and writing philosophy for my St. Joe students, and I listed over 100 some possible rudiments. I have a whole dictionary full of further rudiments, but I think the list I provided was comprehensive enough. If you would like that list, please do reach out at animal@lcpfoundation.org for more information on our philosophical consultation services. In the meanwhile, let's get back to the basics, back to our rudiments. You will want to examine each text that you go through for these patterns. How do they emerge in the wild? How does Plato use the good in his Republic, for example? In one passage, we might see him using the good as a sort of practical measure that brings about proper results within a craft, within a vocation, but we also see this used as an ultimate standard of measure, the ultimate pattern of objective value that holds good universally and throughout all contexts. So how is Plato using those different instances of the good in order to bring about his full message? So what function does each rudiment play within a passage? And in one philosopher's broad system or canon or what have you, set of all they've written, this good could change, could evolve, or be used differently given their purposes in each text. So create for yourself a web of how these rudiments first emerge, the context, the conversational context out of which they arise, and how they could function within this philosopher's greater system, and how actually inconsistencies in the uses of the rudiments could lead to a greater understanding of how a philosopher's system comes together, is formally consistent, is useful, however it is you're trying to evaluate it. So the rudiments are key for building your own original understanding of what's going on. And as you encounter these rudiments out in the wild, pause and ask critical questions, critical in terms of how do these rudiments fit into the passage, how do they serve the greater message of the author, how do they fit into the greater schema of their whole system. But stop and ask another critical question. Does that jive with your understanding of the good? Whether it be if you would place yourself in the context, imaginatively maybe, about which the philosopher's writing, would you have made the same choice, used good in the same way that Plato did, or used existence in the same way that Sartre did? Stop and ask those questions, because as you were going through this canon, we want to make sure methodically we're placing ourselves as equal contributors to the philosophical conversation, the greater conversation that expands and extends beyond this moment right here, right now. When we are engaging with these texts, we are engaging in a great tradition, a wild tradition, a tradition with many pitfalls and which has been used for many nefarious ends, but which could be used for good if we approach it correctly, as equally capable of contributing to the philosophical tradition as these great authors with which we're dealing in the canon. So apply these scenarios to your own life as you creatively build a web connecting these patterns together that represents an author's thought, and then compare Plato and Aristotle, perhaps, Husserl and Sartre, perhaps. How do their webs compare? How is Plato using beauty versus how Aristotle's using beauty? What is Plato's take on poetry versus Aristotle's take on poetry? And how do these rudiments come into play to help justify their claims? So think about that as well. Not just how do these rudiments generally function in a literary way to carry the weight of the message, but how do they fit together in a necessary order to represent and embody the general order of the universe, or moral order, or aesthetic order, whatever epistemological order that a philosopher is attending to. So rudiments, always a good idea. They are your best friends. Define them as you go along, but note that your definition could change, and that's okay. Your definition of good, as you go along in your philosophical journey, you don't have to dig in your heels and commit to something you no longer believe in, we can go back and tinker our relationship to these rudiments and play them differently, situate them differently. Yeah. So with your rudiments mastered, and with a good map or web of a philosopher's thought that revolves around the downbeats of these rudiments, you'll be in a great position to write a formal analysis. With these rudiments in hand, please highlight passages where they come out. Rudiments are also indicators of important passages that you can highlight and use as quotes to substantiate the claims that you will make in your paper. So those rudiments are great to have in hand. You have your map. Now you're ready to write your paper. Begin with a formal analysis. All right. Which will look like, or is called often, a reconstruction of a philosopher's argument or their point. Now, in the Logic Basics video, we talked about how arguments are not so much debates, but formal presentations of a point and the evidence which supports that point. So we want to reconstruct an author's argument. Some philosophers write in a very poetic way. Plato writes through his dialogues, and some have a penchant for prose, and do not always lay out their arguments in numbered form. But that's okay. We can reconstruct an argument through our formal analysis. This can look like a summary, but with a philosophy paper, your summary is more than a mere statement of the facts of a text. You want to demonstrate the necessary order of the philosopher's thought. So you want to present that sort of logical necessity that we find in our Logic Basics. We want to see the author's message in that form. Put it in proper evidence, put it in the proper light, reconstruct their message so that it can be as charitable as possible. Again, there will be critical analysis involved in this formal analysis. A great way to begin a formal analysis is to look at contradictions. Hey, wait a second. Plato uses beauty as an idea in this passage, but over here, he's using beauty to describe a sort of state, a flow state of alignment of the three parts of the soul. How can beauty be this and this? Plato, do you find yourself in trouble, or is there a way to overcome this contradiction and find deeper meaning in the text? That is a great way to begin the formal analysis part of your paper, the reconstruction of the argument, and this is often called the definition portion of the text. I would say it would be a demonstration of the rudiments portion. But how does Plato define the good in this one section, or beauty in this one section? And how does he define it in this other section? And to philosophically define is, again, more than just listing facts or descriptions about the thing you're questioning into, but to put it in context, in the context of the passage, in the context of a whole system, in the context of the historical time in which the author is writing, how it is they deal with the canon, if there is one at that point in history in which they are writing. Define that rudiment, define that argument. Give us the axioms or the premises, and how do the conclusions of that philosopher follow from those definitions that they take on. So we use definition to tie back to our logical beginnings. We want to embody as closely as possible deductive connection and a flow from definitions to particulars, universals to particulars. So whenever we define an author's argument, we are, again, laying down those foundational premises. We're reconstructing their argument. We're situating these rudiments within the context of the author's text, and again, looking for formal issues just within that text. Now, history can come in as a formal issue. Social issues can come in our formal analysis as well. But typically, what we're looking for in a formal analysis is textually based inconsistencies and consistencies, and what those consistencies and inconsistencies can teach us about philosophers' thought, and why it's urgent for us to worry about this formal analysis. So what new insight is brought to the greater conversational table by examining these contradictions and inconsistencies and consistencies? What problems do we run into? Does the philosopher overcome them? Does the philosopher not overcome them in your eyes? These questions constitute a formal analysis. Now, when we start to apply theory to the real world, things get a little more messy, but also a lot more fun. Here at the Lawn Chair Philosophy Foundation, we are all about applied papers, applied metaphysics, applied ethics, applied epistemology, applied aesthetics, applied phenomenology. We want it all. We don't want to stop at this formal analysis. Yes, we want to remain faithful to the text whenever we reconstruct an argument and set up our definition portion of the paper. However, we want urgency not only for the conversation in philosophy, but we want to bring a little bit of real world urgency to our conversation as well. Not only to practice what we preach and take a hands-on approach to the problems of our world, the problems of ourselves, our belief systems and how they motivate our individual action and collective action. We want to advertise philosophy well as well. Philosophy can be a wonderful way of approaching problems, or just approaching the world, whether it's a problem or not, in a comprehensive, thoughtful, creative sometimes, as well as very critical and rigorous way. So for our applied papers, we're taking things a step further from this formal analysis. Now, we can apply papers in different ways. One way to remain sort of closer to this formal analysis sphere is to move into next, after this reconstruction. You'll have your intro, reconstruction, definition portion, and then if you want to start an applied paper but want to stay maybe again closer to the formal side of things, we'll just come up with counterexamples. Now, we can have imaginative counterexamples that don't have much to do with real life. We can have imaginative counterexamples involving aliens. Those are not my favorite counterexamples. Again, I like something more forceful, where we take on ourselves and our world and bring some urgency to our thought, and bring a little urgency to philosophy. So I would like to see more real world counterexamples, or hey, Kant's deontological system sounds great on paper, but when you apply it to the real world, It gets you nowhere fast. Okay, that's fine. Well, give us some real world examples of how applying Kant's theory to the real world and allowing it to motivate your actions completely leads to disaster. So paint very clear pictures of your concrete examples. Bring in some data. Bring in some empirical data. But not just any old empirical data. We want sources from a .edu page, or a .org, .gov would be good. .coms are commercial and will not provide the most rigorously vetted empirical data. Now, this isn't to say that some reputable news sources with a .com at the end of their web addresses do not have wonderful presentations of data, but just check into sources and make sure that a news article about some devastating event in Flint, Michigan is reputable and all the facts line up as well as they can. And then go about applying your philosopher's theory to this situation, this concrete situation that could either reveal something new about the author's concept, maybe Plato's concept of the good that we didn't see before, applying it to today and now, or maybe the other way around, this theory could reveal a new perspective from which to approach the empirical data, to do something about it, or to understand it better at least. We can go back and forth. We can use the empirical data to critique, again, someone's philosophical stance. Again, if you don't agree with Kant's ontological system, then you could use these concrete examples to eviscerate. So yes, let's stop there. Now, for your paper, let's put out an outline here. Now, I've got this bindered to a music stand, also sitting on top of a hi-hat. Oh Lord, we're gonna erase very gently. Yes. Okay. Maybe I should crop this part out during the editing. I don't have a lot of time for that. No, I don't. Boom, 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 boom. And I just want to keep that flam there. It's such a pretty flam. Hey, flam. Flamly. Okay. So, as I said, you'll watch your intro. Should be thesis guided. In philosophy, you don't have to fit your whole thesis into one sentence. I think many people try to do that and fit as many highfalutin words in one string of thought all at once. You can break that up. It's best if you break that up. I am a huge fan of philosophical run-on sentences. There's a time and a place for it, not in your introduction, not in your thesis. Now, don't make your thesis statement the whole damn paragraph. But you can break that up into multiple sentences. This thesis will entail a little bit of your formal analysis. It will entail a little bit of your concrete application if you're bringing that in, and it will bring in how you will critically engage with the text in the paper. And you're like, wait a minute, haven't I been critically engaging with this text all along? Oh, not enough. You'll have to have some sort of problem that you, as a scientific philosopher writing this academic paper, run into in your experiment. of formally analyzing or applying to a concrete situation. There's got to be some sort of problem that you overcome, and that critical element must also be captured by your thesis statement. Yeah, no big, it's fine. Again, with concise, cogent writing, you can fit a lot in simple statements, more than you might think. So anyways, then you'll have your intro, and as I said, we typically turn next into the definition portion. Here's your reconstruction. And this is where we'll put our rudiments on display. And then, as I said, we can go on from there to our application, whether that be, hey, Husserl equals good for approaching this concrete situation. Maybe Husserl equals bad, a bad take, or maybe this concrete situation helps us evaluate something bad in Husserl. Either way, you can use this application to critique the author, or use the author to help critique and the situation and to maybe find possible solutions. Either way. Now, I want to stop here because depending on your writing style, how you're using the rudiments, your own critical stance that you'll bring in later, maybe it might be better to jump right into the application part, especially to help build some urgency. If you want to use Nietzsche's conception of the will to power to address the problem of homelessness in Philly, then maybe you can start off, bam, with a very detailed painting of the situation. Give me some stats. Paint a picture of what experiencing homelessness looks like, the powers that be that occasion the possibility for homelessness in such a well-to-do society as we have in the first place. Really dig into those details and paint a fresh picture for us. You can start off that way and then say, and who would help us detangle all of these issues? Well, some Nietzsche. So you could flip these very easily. Again, depending on your ultimate aim of the paper and your writing style. Speaking of the ultimate aim of the paper, again, we'll have this thesis that will include this formal analysis of the definition portion. If you're going the lawn chair way and following our hands-on heuristics, this will be an applied paper, and you will have a brief presentation of the problem, the concrete issue at hand, and what problems, solutions, or insights become of our application, of our thought experiment here. So that thesis will be like a conclusion in a numbered argument. Remember, here is our ultimate pattern. Even if we're using inductive methods to present the data of a concrete situation like stats and hypotheses and theories and the like, we here in philosophy, for better or worse, model our papers off of the formal necessity of a deductive argument. That's our conclusion. So, our inferential steps take us from premise to premise and eventually to this conclusion. So each paragraph should in some way serve as a premise for your conclusion. And each portion, each paragraph of your paper will have its own topic sentence or conclusion, and then each sentence in that paragraph should serve as a premise for your conclusion in it, which is to serve as a premise for your ultimate conclusion, your thesis. Okay, so keep that in mind. Throughout each step, we're making inferences, and the way that we treat evidence must be logical. Whenever you are collecting quotes, we use it as just another point in our data set. In a literary analysis paper, we might have quotes from the text with the patterns, with the rudiments, and we can, just go on and on and on, unfolding the possible meanings of that quote from the passage that you're using. Don't want to do too much of that here. The way that you unfold and unpack is through explication, which is a logical exercise. So again, you want to explicate the sort of necessary relationship between the ideas and the references to the real world that we're using here. So this philosophy papers are super, super tight. And if you can master a philosophy paper, you can master any paper, my goodness. Okay. You've got your reconstruction, your application, or you can start with your concrete application and or concrete situation that will become the playground for your application, the definition or reconstruction of the author's work. You can also weave these in and out. Just be sure that as you do so, these inferential steps are mirrored. Some students, I think, as an exercise, just had the definition portion and the application portion, took a sentence here, then took a sentence there, moved it, and then just had black, green, black, green, black, green. I'm like, no. If you're going to weave together the definitions and the applications, again, maintain a strict cadence in this logical order. So this definition portion could be a few paragraphs, as could this application portion. Then we want to, again, run into some sort of critical problem. There's always got to be a problem in Western philosophy. So depending on the moves that you have taken so far, your critical problem could be directed at the world, it could be directed at our author, it could be directed at yourself. So let's say that you agree with the statement that we should use Husserl's notion of the life world to explore situations of environmental injustice. I believe that. Here is his theory. I'm going to lay it out in my definition. Let's then re-examine the concrete situation of environmental injustice with these new insights gained from Husserl, and yes, we see a solution. Or do we? To be scientific, we must be critical of ourselves. So we must say, hey, you know what? There might be a problem here. Husserl, even though he wants to position the transcendental, irreal ego within an absolute framework that is a sort of nexus point where we have the meeting of material and imagining and feeling and mood and context and history and what have you. He's still too idealistic. He still writes in this old school classical way with its colonial undertones, overtones, all sorts of tones, and is too idealistic of a position to allow us to see the nuances at play, the experience of these states of environmental injustice from the perspective of those who must endure it, from the perspective of legislators, from the perspectives of everyday folks going, oh my goodness, what should we do? Maybe Husserl's system is too idealistic and does not allow us to see the nuances of the situation, how they come together, and obscures a possible solution from our side. Do you want to give up at this point and say, yeah, that's a good point, maybe not? You can. That's fine to say, well, maybe this is a bad idea, but it's a good thing that we went over it because there were still some good insights to be gleaned from Husserl. Maybe we can't use his system of the life world totally in order to address these concrete examples of environmental injustice, but having gone through this exercise, we can pick out X aspect of his theory, Y aspect, and Z, and then take that with us into the future conversations. Or you can say, you know what, that's a valid criticism. But if you think about the life world from the level of interphenomenological time consciousness, then we see all of these convergences, and using the transcendental ideal ego, we are able to keep distinct the different strata of influences and motivations that are occasioning the state of affairs that we label environmentally unjust. You just have to use Husserl's appliqué correctly. And you have to read more than just the first section of Ideals 1. Anyway, so this critical problem, we must deal with it. Maybe we could call that the dealing with it section. And then once we deal with it, whether we take a step back and say, you know what, yeah, this might be a bad theory if we take it at face value, but we can still take these redeeming qualities and put them in our pocket, take them into the next conversation. Or your dealing with it could be a clapping back and saying, no, we can overcome that critical problem when we think about Husserl's life world in this way. Or again, whomever, whatever you're writing about. So you're going to deal with it, and then we're going to have our conclusion, which sort of recaps the moves that have been made. Conclusions in philosophy papers, whether you are sticking purely to a formal analysis or if you're doing a hands-on applied paper, you can say, you know what, ultimately this is my conclusion, but from an ultimate perspective, I'm just offering a perspective to the conversation, and I recognize that further investigations, further studies, maybe further studies in psychology or further studies in physics or further studies in law, whatever. The conclusion could be a call for further inquiry. It could be a call for further action. Your conclusion, while it should be firm and clear and concise, that firmness can be, I don't know. And if you do know, that's fine too. It used to be, as you'll see reading through the history of philosophy, that conclusions were thought to be, these state of affairs, come fight me if you think otherwise, and you stand firm in that conclusion for the rest of your life, no matter what evidence comes before you later on. But no, we here in academic philosophy today welcome conclusions that are firm and take a stance, but are also open-minded and invite further conversation. You want to be invitational. that's something I should talk about too before parting ways. Talk about your tone. Historically, in the Western sphere, academic philosophy can be very combative. And after I just go through this whole conversation in the logic video talking about how arguments are not angry arguments, they're not supposed to be. This is supposed to be scientific, but it has often been described as a war, a battleground, the philosophical arena. There are moves to soften that up a bit and make things more conversational, more inclusive of other ways of doing philosophy, writing about philosophy, and we're all for that too. However, there is something to creating a sharp argument, one that critically engages with the opposition, and which can fluidly capture many strands of thought by having a laser sharp, very specific thesis that will allow you to wrap up all of these layers. So make sure that your tone reflects what it is you'd like to achieve. I hope that you want to achieve a solid conclusion, but again, an open conclusion that embodies an open comportment to the world and to evidence and what else could be, to conversation, to honor our interlocutors, even if we do need to rip them to shreds on a formal level. That's fine. We want to exude respect for our own voices, respect for the thoughts that we're dealing with, respect for philosophers, even if they are evil and we do not agree with them at all. We want to paint their philosophies in as charitable of a light as we can, so that we can most efficiently eviscerate them to a good end, so be very sharp, be on your toes, be powerful in writing this paper, but also be light, be delicate, be open, and have a good flow, have a good rhythm. Some philosophy professors are going to want you to stick strictly to this format, and if you want to bring numbered arguments into your paper, for me, that's fine. But I love a good prose, so long as the strict argumentative skeleton is behind your thought. Get a little poetic with it. That's what I like to see. A little breath of fresh air. So this is the general format for how to read philosophy. Again, make sure that you are keeping an eye out for the rudiments, highlighting those sections, taking copious notes on how those passages contextualize those rudiments and how they reveal the function of that rudiment within a philosopher's thought. Compare and contrast different sections from one philosopher. Build yourself a web of their thought from your own perspective, from your own hands-on dealing with it. And then compare and contrast the webs and patterns of other philosophers. Compare and contrast your perspective on the matter. Apply these thoughts to yourself in your own situation. Although, warning there, I will say, I should have said this before. If you are like me and have a runaway imagination, be careful in applying these thoughts to yourself. You could trap yourself into a philosophical world of your own making, which might lead you to the mental hospital. I'm just saying, I've been there. It happens. It happens when you take philosophy a little too seriously. So stay grounded. I think that's a good place to end on. Stay grounded. Bring your passion, but always know that each theory that you deal with, even your most favorite philosopher's theory, has their bounds, has their limits, at some point make no sense in their application at least, and don't apply to everything. We want to honor our beliefs and celebrate them, but also have a healthy dose of skepticism So to achieve all that you want, to have a nice focused thesis, to capture all of these different strands of analysis, and to capture a mood and an approach, a trustful approach to your reader. Stay grounded. Yeah, and that's it. Please do reach out with any questions. Again, I'm at animal@lcpfoundation.org. Open office hours are free. Schedule one today, and we'll look over your paper for you. Got editing services. What more could you ask for? All right, see you.